Hi, I'm Aaron Wills. We're here at Little Hill Berry Farm in Northfield, Minnesota, USDA Zone 4B. We are a certified organic berry farm. We have 15 acres. Our primary crops are blueberries, strawberries, and raspberries. We also grow a smaller amount of table grapes, sour cherries, aronia berries, and a few currants. We're a part of the Organic Fruit Growers Association, which is a organization of organic fruit grower farmers in the upper Midwest. And it also includes industry professionals and university researchers and even, just backyard fruit growers. We got a grant from the Organic Fruit Growers Association for climate change adaptation. And so on our farm, one of our climate change adaptation strategies is moving more of our growing into high tunnels. High tunnels help us manage kind of the extreme weather we're seeing, the temperature fluctuations or the extreme storms. And so in total, we grow about 10,000 strawberry plants, like in those high tunnels and caterpillar tunnels. We also grow raspberries in a high tunnel. So we have one 30 by 100 foot high tunnel that's fall raspberries. We started because we tried to grow strawberries outside, dangerous strawberries outside, and they had a lot of disease problems. And what we found is once we moved them in the tunnel, it kept the water off of the leaves. And so we really all of a sudden had like no disease pressure, no fungal disease pressure, no mold. And as an organic grower, those things are just like really hard to deal with, and there really aren't any like products for them or something like that. And so by putting them in a tunnel, that sort of problem goes away. It also, of course, just like extends the season. You tend to get bigger fruit, and so growing in tunnels is really popular in growing vegetables, and you don't see it as much in fruit. But what we've found is that it really allows us to grow fruit organically a lot easier and, honestly, more profitable. And so for our grant, we got a BCS tractor, which is a small two-wheel tractor that works really well in high tunnels. So we wanted to grow more in high tunnels, but we didn't really have the equipment for it. Like a traditional tractor doesn't really fit very well in a tunnel. And so getting a grant for the BCS tractor sort of gives us more opportunities to grow more in tunnels and do it better. This is the BCS that we bought. And as opposed to this is our John Deere kind of, I mean, it's a small tractor, but our just kind of more traditional tractor. So as you can see, the BCS is a two-wheel tractor, which is, part of why it's so much smaller, but also makes it much more maneuverable. Um, and on the back is the tiller attachment that we got, and we're able to sort of, there's the tiller itself, and then this roller, which helps control the depth and kind of create a good either seed bed or just like even plane. As part of our climate change adaptation, we're growing more fruit in tunnels. But in order to do that, it's not just as simple as like, okay, now we're just going to grow in tunnels. You need sort of equipment and systems to make that happen. And obviously the first piece of equipment is like you need the tunnel itself, but then you need the tools to work inside of it. And so I think it's just really easy to see the difference between just like size and scale of the equipment. So like this is what you would see out in the open field, very standard, normal fruit and vegetable farm tractor. And it's just really big. It's just big and heavy and not very maneuverable in a very tight, small space as a tunnel. And while you can fit it in a high tunnel, it's difficult and a little bit perilous. And you can't put it in a caterpillar tunnel. So you can't put it in a smaller tunnel, a tractor like this. So the BCS is really like the right tool to do field work, soil work, manage a crop in a tunnel. And so in order to like make that shift into growing in a tunnel, we needed a different piece of equipment that was gonna work well for the work we needed to do, be easy for myself or someone else to operate and not run into the tunnel, break the tunnel, and sort of save us time and labor, because it's like either you go from this level to doing everything by hand, which is sort of over here, and that's really not tenable either, just in terms of labor and wear and tear on your body and just time. There's only so much time in the day. So this tool is sort of in the middle of having to go all by hand or this big tractor. So it's a small tractor that can do the same kind of work in a smaller space. For strawberries, we have two 30 by 100-foot high tunnels, and then we have 7 caterpillar tunnels, which are smaller. They're 15 feet wide by 100 feet. And if you're not familiar with caterpillar tunnels, they're, essentially like a simpler high tunnel. They cost quite a bit less. They're easier to move, but they're also maybe not quite structurally as strong. We haven't really had any problems with them in terms of holding up to snow or like extreme weather. So they could be a really good option to like think about if you maybe just a high tunnel is out of your budget. You want to try something a smaller scale, or maybe you think you might want to move them in the future. They can be built in a day to 2 days with really like no construction knowledge. Whereas I would say a high tunnel, there's just more to it. You got to sort of know what you're doing. Caterpillar tunnels, one of the main differences from a high tunnel is just like its construction. And so the posts they're not pounded into the ground. They're basically set on rebar that you put in the ground. And there's just like less or no like wood bracing along the sides and along the end. And so it in a way like kind of floats, and I think it gets the name caterpillar tunnel because it's not necessarily perfectly straight either. You don't need to have like you can put it on slope to ground and it doesn't really matter. And so it sets on rebar, and there are some posts to sort of tie it together, but then you use like rope over the top of it to secure the plastic instead of like attaching it to the frame with wiggle wire. And so it just kind of like moves and floats a little bit more is the best way I would describe it, as opposed to like a fixed structure like a high tunnel. And that's partly why they're not as big, because they're not as tall. They couldn't be as big because they couldn't take the weather. So by keeping them smaller, I think the structural element works. So like 15 feet, I think is probably about the max. But because there's so much less material, because they're smaller, they're probably half to even more or less per square foot if you sort of calculate it by size. And like I said before, you could really do it yourself or with a couple people with really no construction knowledge. It doesn't have to be perfectly square, and you don't need any special equipment to like pound posts in the ground. And so really with not knowing much, you could put it up in a couple of days. So it's just a lot more accessible, I think, to a wider array of growers. Before we had the BCS, we did have some high tunnels, and we could get our like mid-sized tractor into it. Uh, I would say it was like, for me, always just a little scary that I was gonna run into the high tunnel, and I did once run into the high tunnel with the loader and like crack the post. And also my like staff, like nobody was interested in shaking that on. Like it was just like it always felt like, we're one step away from disaster. So while it could be done, it was hard to do. And I was also a little concerned about soil compaction in the tunnel. And, to like maneuver into the corners, you had to drive all over them. And it just didn't feel like the tool really worked very well. For us, like we're growing annuals, so we're growing these strawberries as an annual. And so we are like turning over the soil, we are planting cover crop. We got a subsoiler with the BCS to try to like deal with less compaction over time. And it's something that anybody can drive in the sense that like it's not super heavy to maneuver, and it just like fits in the tunnel well. And so you can get to the edge of the tunnel, into the corners. You can maneuver it around. It just feels like the right tool for the job you're doing. And so, we have a tiller, so to kind of till up the ground after we take out the strawberries. We have kind of just some like cultivating tines to just incorporate cover crop seed. And then we have the subsoil, like I mentioned, for kind of every so often breaking up compaction. Starting in the spring, we would have a cover crop growing in the tunnel, and we would mow it down using the BCS. And then, once the sort of residue dries, we would till it in again with the BCS. So we're using it a couple times in the spring, kind of before we plant. So then we would set up our tunnels, plant our strawberries, grow them throughout the season. And then kind of in the fall, when we're ready to take them out, we would take them all out, and then we'd use the BCS to sort of till up the soil again. We would spread cover crop seed and then use the BCS again to lightly kind of incorporate the seed. So we're using it for sure, 4 times a season. Um, and then we also use it kind of intermittently, just depending on the situation. So one thing we do use it for is spreading compost. And like that's this thing where, that's going to take a lot of time. We would be doing it by hand, and, we're literally probably cutting it down 3 to 4 times in terms of how much time and labor it would take. And that's really a big thing on like fruit and vegetable farms, just availability of labor, and also like cost of labor, and even wear and tear on your body. Hauling a lot of compost in and out of 7 caterpillar tunnels is just a lot of work, physically and in time. So this tool, does a lot of that work for us. Saves us a lot of time. High tunnels support our like climate change adaptation and kind of mitigation, in a few different ways. So during the season, the tunnels protect the leaves and the berries from water, which kind of brings in disease and mold. We use drip irrigation, so we can kind of water the plants without having to get them wet by like using overhead irrigation or something like that. So we use drip irrigation for watering. This is just showing like this is what these plants would look like if they were outside. So they get a little bit of water on the edge of the tunnels. This is anthracnose, which would move into the berries typically. But then once you just start like 2 feet further in, you can see these leaves. They don't get wet. They have a little bit of dew on them, but they're not getting rainwater. And so we just have like no leaf disease. Also, the fruit's not getting wet, so it's not going to get soft or have any mold issues, which is just kind of inevitable if you're growing strawberries outside. Heat can be an issue for some crops in high tunnels during like the middle of the summer. We haven't really had a problem with that. We also, basically after May, we keep the tunnels wide open. The ends are open, the sides are open. We're no longer interested in more heat. We're trying to keep it as cool and as ventilated as we can. I sort of thought at some point we would need shade cloth, but that just really hasn't been the case. Both our strawberries and our raspberries are just fine during the kind of the heat of the season of the summer. And then of course we get the benefit of the fall where we can close the tunnels to like keep production going longer for both strawberries and raspberries. At the end of the season, at least for strawberries, we'll pull them out. Well, actually, we're growing them as an annual. So we're going to take the strawberries out, we're going to roll up the fabric, and then we're going to plant a cover crop. And since we can keep the tunnel closed, we can keep that cover crop going into like December for sure. And so we do actually have overhead irrigation in the tunnels just for watering the cover crop, both like in the winter and then also like in early spring, because it will start to grow in like end of March. So we can have, 8 foot tall stand of like cover crop uh, during those kind of winter, spring kind of months, and then work that back into the soil in April before we're like ready to plant. In the tunnel for dangerous strawberries, we use white on black landscape fabric. I think it's made by like DeWitt or something, but one side is white, which the reason that's important is it reflects light. So it is like giving the plants more light. And this is something that I got the idea from Cornell University originally. When they looked at dangerous strawberries, they were growing them outside and they were using white plastic. And they found that that was pretty significant difference as opposed to using just like typical black plastic. The reason though that we use white on black is if you have just white fabric, it lets light through and the weeds just keep growing. So by having a black layer underneath, it smothers weeds, but then you get the light reflection element for the strawberries. And we have tested it. We've used black fabric and it's like a significant difference. It's sort of night and day, I would say. Also, I think it keeps the plants cooler. It keeps the tunnel cooler. We are primarily a U-pick farm, and so for like all of our crops, we do U-pick, except what we grow in tunnels. And that's just because we've found that it's not as good of an experience for people, especially in the fact that like a lot of people bring their kids to UPick and your kids just have nowhere to move around in a tunnel without stepping on something. And it can be quite hot, frankly. And like our workers are used to like picking inside, but just the average person isn't. And so it's just not as good of an environment. So I do think it's something to think about if you're thinking about tunnels and like you pick. I'm not going to say it can't be done, but we've tried and customers just don't love it and it just doesn't work very well. So we even have like next to our raspberry tunnel, we have a pick raspberry field. We pick in the tunnel, the customers pick in the field, just the normal outdoor field. All the fruit that we pick ourselves, we sell on the farm at our farm store, especially dangerous strawberries. I don't think you'll ever have a problem selling them. They just kind of walk out the door. You're going to have strawberries in July, August, September. There aren't really any other ways to get like local strawberries, and there aren't many people growing them. So they're definitely something to think about if you want something that's easy to sell.